What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Motherhood Unstressed podcast. I'm your host, Liz Carlisle. It is an honor and a pleasure to be in your ear right now, whether you're on your commute or walking your dog or working out, whatever your choice. I have had a great week. The boys finished their first week back in school. I think they're really going to have a great year. They were so happy, and we actually ended up having a get-together at the house on Friday to kind of celebrate that first week being back and to reconnect with people in our community that, you know, we see around town, but we don't really connect with. And I think nowadays it's so hard, you know, as connected as we are on social media, we don't have that face-to-face time. And I started to realize, I was literally sitting in bed the week before, you know, online, on social media, and I started to realize that, you know, we need more of that face-to-face contact with people. Our souls need it, you know, our minds need it. Everything about us needs that. We aren't having that like we used to. I think even, you know, growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was just so taken for granted. And to have that now is really a treat and a gift. So I was sitting in bed a couple weeks ago thinking like, okay, well, if this is how I'm feeling, I need to do something about it. So I just started texting and emailing people that I like and that I appreciate, and their kids get along with my kids. And I was like, do you want to just come over? And I think people were probably a little surprised because we haven't done a party like that in a while. But you guys, it was so amazing. It was so much fun, and it was chaotic and crazy because we had all these kids running around downstairs. But I loved every single minute of it. I loved connecting with these other humans who are in it. You know, their kids are young, they're doing their best, they're stressed out. I mean, it's exactly what I talk about on this show and what I talk about on my Instagram at Motherhood Unstressed. And it was in real life, and I just soaked it all in. And I think everyone who was there really, really enjoyed it too. And I also invited some people who are in their 20s and like they don't have any kids yet, and to watch their face as the kids are like screaming and running around was kind of funny, but we laughed about it. And that too, I think, was really great too, because to mix in older and younger people in a room, you really get some different perspectives, and you really get to see how connected we all are and how much we actually do relate, because we're all, you know, in this city, in this country, in this world. So, I just loved it. And I definitely am going to have more things like that in the future. Just because to me, like selfishly, it was just so healing for me. And that's honestly something I really want to get better at, is just building up these relationships that I already have in my life, but really focusing my energy and my attention on nurturing those relationships and building those up. Because as Esther Perel says, you know, the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives. And I get chills even saying that, because it's so true. So that's really going to be my focus for 2019, 2020. Politics aside, I'm going to be really focusing on my face-to-face relationships in my life. And, you know, all the relationships that I have with you, the listener out there, that is meaningful to me too. And who knows, maybe one day we'll meet up at some event or some conference, and we'll have this, you know, standard relationship already built, which is just so special and healing as well. But to move on to why we're here today is to talk about my guest and the life experience that she is sharing with all of you today. Her name is Kaplan. She's a birth worker and a parenting coach, and she works with moms and moms-to-be. She originally started out working with expecting mothers because she had a pretty traumatic birth herself, and, you know, she figured out that that's not something that's okay. You know, she wants to help other women avoid that. And so she was a doula and, you know, helping moms really create the birth experience that they would love to have. And we all know birth experiences, who knows what can happen, anything can happen, but really crafting, you know, a good mindset around that. And then it kind of evolved into her helping women, you know, as their kids got older, because they loved her and they loved working with her. So she continued on as, you know, her clients' kids got older. But in this episode, we are talking about self-care, of course, the importance of self-care and sense of self for mothers. How often do we feel like we're giving everything we have to our kids and then in the process losing ourselves? I mean, this is like so resonating with me and my message and everything, you know, that I deal with my audience and you guys, because we get it, you know, this is real life. But we do take an interesting turn in the conversation because I read a blog post that she did about her sexual revolution. And you guys know I am super interested in anything relating to sex. I think we all are. And so I had to ask her about that. And, you read Sexual Revolution, you think it's going to be about more sex and embodying your sexuality, which I think is super important and necessary. But actually, it's the reverse, and why she felt like she didn't want to have to do her duty as a wife and have sex whenever her husband wanted her to. She said, no, and I don't want to tell too much, but she said, no, I'm not going to be that way. And here's why. And we kind of get into that too, which I think is really just authentic and real and healing too, because if you're a woman who feels like you're having sex when you don't want to have sex, like that's not okay. That's not okay for anybody. Like staying true to yourself, I think, is always what we should be doing. So without further ado, here is the episode. If you love it, please share it. I've been loving the reviews that you've been leaving. I'm definitely going to start sharing more of those. And here is one that I really, really loved. This one is from Nick to Cook, and she says, I just found this podcast a few weeks ago, and wow, it is great. Lots of great interviews to help empower women and help us grow our consciousness and presence in the lives of our children. Love anyone that feels as passionate about helping mothers as those in this podcast. To read that, I get chills all over again, and it really just, again, solidifies this work and, the guests that I have on this show, these amazing people from all walks of life, just helping us all grow and just elevate the human consciousness. And that was DC screaming in the background. We keep it real on this show. Okay, guys, without further ado, here is the episode. Enjoy.
Well, hello, and welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so excited to talk about the work that you're doing as a birth worker and parenting coach and all of that. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so before we dive into all the juiciness of the podcast, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background about you and how you got into this work in the first place?
Okay, I'll try to keep that very short and sweet. So I am a mom myself. I have 4 kids. And I came to first be just doing birth work because of my own birth experiences. I had a pretty traumatic and I would say traditional Western birth experience with my first kid, and it was not pleasant for me. And so my second time around, I did it totally differently, and it really was like an eye-opener for me, and I got very inspired and emboldened to really kind of, I became a birth evangelist. I was like, everybody needs to know. And so that's when I first started my practice. I was only doing birth work, and I was a birth doula. And then over time, I realized that I wanted to add childbirth education to my practice. And then as my kids were growing and my clients' kids were growing, I realized that I was fielding lots and lots of questions about parenting and the motherhood mindset and discipline and all that stuff, from like getting your kids to sleep through the night to tantrums to how can I carve out a minute in my life, or why am I so miserable and stuff like that. And so I added coaching to my practice as well.
I love that. And I feel like that's a very natural transition. I mean, the people that you worked with when they're going through this major life transition are now like, hey, my kids too. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, totally. My practice just grew with me and my family. And, now my oldest kid is 14, and I've got my littlest is 4. And so I'm like in all stages of motherhood at all times.
That's amazing. So, I mean, why is this work that you're doing so important to you? Why is this your purpose and your mission in life?
So the simple answer is that I feel like the work I do helps heal families. So even though I work almost exclusively with mothers, I see from my own firsthand personal experience as a mom, but then also through my client, how helping heal and support a mother and give her the tools and belief and empowerment that she needs completely transforms the entire family unit. And so, and I saw a huge lack in my clients and in myself of recognizing how important it is and what a gift it is for our children, for us to actually be living and modeling complete, happy, self-actualized lives for our kids. And so, I'm sure you have already experienced this yourself with all the many people that you've talked to and interviewed, but we all have some little shred of mom guilt within us, and most of us have more than a shred.
Right.
And it really is so toxic for ourselves and for our families, because we stop ourselves from doing the things we need to do that actually would be the key to making our families run smoother, but we feel guilty about doing them because they're for ourselves.
And that's so crucial what you just said. I mean, that is the crux, I think, of every woman's the block that's holding them back from really living their best lives. It's like, well, I can't do this, or I can't go on this solo trip somewhere because I'm taking away from my family. Why do you think so many women are afraid or just hesitant, I guess, to help themselves first? Because we're all smart. Everyone listening to this is educated and smart and doing amazing things. Why do you think we don't take that step when we know it's going to be good for us?
I think, well, first of all, I think that for some of us, we don't know that it's going to be good for us. We feel on a very deep, almost primal level that doing things for ourselves is somehow tacitly taking away from the other people, namely our children, who we feel like we need to be doing things for. So I think for a lot of people, especially when I first start working with moms, I hear all the time, and it's not something they even are consciously aware of, but I hear from moms all the time, this kind of like intrinsic belief that, well, if I do this thing for myself, that means that I'm not doing something for my child, and therefore I'm taking away from my child. So I think that's the first thing. I think there's definitely elements in our society, especially, I know probably most of your listeners are in the US. The society that we grow up in is kind of talking out of both sides of its mouth. We talk about family values. We put mothers and families up on this pedestal, but it's not in a reverent way. It's in a judgment and unattainable ideal way. And then on the other side, we make it practically impossible for families to function properly without any maternity leave, without support, without paternity leave, like all these elements that would make it so that women understand, like, you're supposed to need a time to get used to doing this. You're not supposed to know how to do this on your own from the very beginning. And you're never, ever, ever, no matter how old your child is, supposed to be able to do this by yourself. We are tribal creatures, and we do not live in a tribe anymore. And in fact, our society really shuns that. And so the situation is ripe for these women, myself included, who've grown up their entire lives before they became mothers, feeling perhaps marginalized, mistreated, devalued, not thinking that much of themselves and being very critical on themselves. Then they come into motherhood and it's more of the same, only 10 times worse.
Oh
because
my God.
The stakes are so high. Once you have a kid, failure is not an option. Once you have a child, once you're a mother, you just can't accept it. But it's kind of like this catch-22, because we will make mistakes. We will fail as moms over and over and over again. And if we can't accept that about ourselves, we're just in an impossible situation.
Man, that's 100% true. I feel like you're speaking to my direct experience. No, because that's what happened to me. I had my first son when I was about 25 years old. It was fast and furious. And then it was like, I felt like I was completely drowning, and I had moved to a new state because my husband was from Georgia. I was completely isolated. I had no tribe anymore. It was incredibly hard. I literally was on the bathroom floor one night crying because I felt like I wasn't doing or being enough. And this was like never going to get better. Like I needed you in my life back then, because
I needed me in my life back then too. I've got practically the same story. My first kid was born when I was 25, and I have a distinct memory of standing over him while he slept in his crib, weeping, tears falling onto my son's face, thinking, this is the biggest mistake I've ever made, and it's the only thing I can't undo. And I can't tell anybody, because that's a terrible thing to believe.
Right. Exactly. No, I totally get it. And I when do you think that that tribal system kind of went away from our society? Because I feel like my mother, she had her family around, the women back then, you didn't necessarily all go to work like we do now. When do you think that kind of faded away? Because this system now that we have is made for machines. This is not like a human system in place anymore.
I totally agree. It's why I'm not living in the States right now, or one of the reasons why I don't. So obviously I'm not a historian or anything, but I would say that I think it started way, way, way before our parents' generation. It's definitely true that more mothers stayed home with their kids, but it's also true that mothers still felt isolated and sad and bereft and unable to pursue the things they wanted for perhaps different or maybe a different nuance of the reasons why we feel that way now. Now it's like, like, you can have everything, you can do anything, you can have a career and you can have kids. And then you have no idea how many moms I hear was like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, other people are able to have a career and take care of their family and their house is clean and they don't scream at their kids. And why can't I do that? I'm like, oh, sister, nobody's doing that. Like, you can have all the things, but not at the same time. Like, there's still only 24 hours a day and you're still only one person. The difference now is that you can choose what you want, but you still have to make a choice. And I think it's kind of a lie that we've been spoon-fed through this kind of like revolution for women. But the feeling of like isolation, talk about hormones, all of those things, I think that's been a long time coming, because like, when was the last time we truly lived in tribes? And over the last generations, people live farther and farther away from their families. You know, it's just, I think it's just something that's been building over a long, long time.
Oh, 100%, 100%. So we've recognized the problem. We're aware of it. We've talked about it. That's why I love doing this show, because like someone listening right now is like, thank you for saying that, because I've been feeling this and nobody's talking about it. So thank you.
Yeah.
So now that we're aware of the problem and it's not a shameful thing, it's a reality, what can women do to feel more empowered in their lives, to realize that, okay, this is what's going on. I'm not feeling great right now, but there's something I can do.
Mm-hmm. One is actual skills, like learning how to respond and parent and discipline your child in a way that's effective and empowering to your child and actually works for you. And the other is family systems, things as simple as making rules, having a routine, a chore wheel, getting maybe somebody to come and help you with cleaning the house during the week, or all those little kind of home admin things that seem maybe superficial, but they're game changers. Like getting something like a babysitter 2 mornings a week can completely transform your life as a mother if you've been never, ever, ever had a minute to yourself since your baby was born. And there's so many women who are in that situation. So the work that I do focuses on all 3 of those areas: the mindset piece, the systems piece, and the discipline piece. Because when I first started working with moms, outside of birth, I only was really focusing on the discipline piece. I was teaching them, like, you know, how to get your kids to listen the first time you ask, how to, you know, keep your cool when your kids are making you want to pull your hair out, how not to scream, why it's so important to have compassion when you're disciplining your children, and all that stuff. Well, that was really, really important. But it wasn't enough, because if a mom is feeling completely overwhelmed, spread too thin, like at her wit's end, telling her to stay calm while she disciplines her child, it's just not going to happen, because she's completely, she's just completely depleted. She doesn't have that in her left to give her child. And so I realized, like, okay, we really need to be kind of backing up here and talking about, like, what are you doing for yourself? How do you feel? What do you think your job is as a mom? Because if you think your job is to make your kids do stuff and create a certain kind of a person at the end of this whole 18-year shenanigans, you're going to feel like a failure 24/7, because you are not capable. None of us is capable of forcing another person in this world, including our children, sometimes especially our children, to do anything. And if you think that's your mandate as a mom, you're barking up the wrong tree. So, you know, backing up and really recognizing, like, that's not my job. That's not my job as a mom. And I'm actually am doing my job and, you know, kicking butt and taking names at it. I just don't see that because of, you know, all these other mindset pieces, and that I've set myself this impossible task. I need to reframe so much. So there's a lot of that mindset piece that has to happen. And then, like, the systems piece, it's quite simple in one hand, but it's hard in others, because if you don't have the belief that you deserve to have a home and a family that run well and that might need, you know, some help from people outside of yourself, you're not going to do those quite simple things, like perhaps calling a cleaning lady to come once a month, or perhaps getting a babysitter or a mother's helper to come in once a week. Those things are quite simple for many of us if we have those means, but so many of us aren't doing it because we don't feel like it's right or okay, or it means something bad about us and things like that. So that systems piece, even though it's so simple, like organize your family, make a routine, you still sometimes come to it kicking and screaming. Some of my clients do, or it's like, you are not a bad mom if you need a break once a week. It's okay, you know, that kind of thing.
Do you find that when women start putting in these systems that they take to it pretty quickly? Like once they make that initial step to do it and they like push past that uncomfortability, then are they like loving it, or do they want to go back to the way they were?
Well, that's maybe a more nuanced question than you realize, because, once we go back to the mindset piece, like human beings are creatures of habit. And when we're trying to make a change in our life, whether we could talk about it as like, oh, I'm trying to eat more healthy. I'm trying to get up earlier. I'm trying to start exercising more. I'm trying to implement a routine with my family. Whatever it is, human beings resist change. And so even though we get over that like initial hump of like, okay, I'm starting this new thing and I need to learn how to do it. And at first it's going to be a little bit of a slog, and then we get to the other side of that and it's like, oh yeah, this is working great. We still have not necessarily completely embodied and created a new identity for ourselves. Like, I now am a person I don't just do this thing, I am this thing. That takes time. And when we're still in that, like, sort of what I call that resistance phase of learning a new skill and really having to be intentional and mindful about it, when the going gets tough, when you get stressed, human beings naturally resort back to their default, which is their like primal fear space of like, that's why we yell at our kids. That's why we get in fights with our partners, or, whatever, or we revert back to thinking bad thoughts about ourselves when we're trying to start thinking positive, all those things. And that's why I've realized for myself personally and for my clients, like, it's not enough for me to just write a book and here's everything you need to do. Like, you need accountability, you need a coach, because working with somebody consistently over all that time is what's actually going to get you there, because you're definitely going to hit some hiccups. Most people work with me for 6 months, and try to imagine a time in your life, a 6-month period in your life where nothing weird or stressful happened.
Right.
Never. That's never. So when I start working with a mom, I'm like, we're going to be together for 6 months. And I promise you there's going to be at least one day where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. I give up. I stink. I'm a crappy mom, and, whatever. And that's why you have a coach, because I can be there with you and be like, okay, let's figure out what's going on. Let's get back on the horse, all that stuff. But as far as like the actual experience of like, what is it like when you first start adopting these things? Most of my clients, our second session, they're like, oh my God, I completely transformed my life. My kid is listening to me. I haven't yelled at him in like a week. I'm like, I know. You're like in the honeymoon period.
Right.
Stuff really works. Just wait, 3 months from now, we're going to be having a tearful conversation because you're like, I can't do it anymore. So it's not that the things don't work or it takes a long time for them to work. That's not the case at all. Having a schedule, learning how to respond to your kids with love and empathy, all those things, you can do that overnight practically. But sticking with it and making it part of who you are and how you navigate the world, that's the part that takes time.
I love that you just said that, because, so many people on these shows, like we were talking about before, like put a nice little bow on something and say, you just do it this way and then your life will be forever great. But you were just so real with, what really happens in these situations. And I love that. I feel like we just broke down a wall of like fakeness. I love it.
That's awesome. I love that.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about, what do you mean when you mention the sexual revolution? What's going on with that?
Oh, yeah. So I wrote a blog post, it's probably like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago at this point, that was basically like why my sexual revolution is actually having less sex. And I should have known that it was going to be like one of my popular blog posts, because anytime you talk about sex, people love it. My most popular video is one that I did where I talked about sex with my teenager, and we talked about like porn and masturbation and stuff like that. And everybody loves that video because how many of those do you see where a 14-year-old is going to talk on a video about that?
Right.
So anyway, that blog post was really popular. And really what I just meant was, I just think, and this is definitely born out of my own experience, but I've since realized that a lot of women my age, which is almost 40, have had the similar experience, is you just reach a point where you're like, you know what? I'm not 19 anymore, okay? And I shouldn't have been having sex when I didn't want to then, but I'm definitely not doing it now. And you realize so many things, or at least I did. I can only speak for myself, but I realized so many things about the way that I thought about sex and my body. And of course, some of that is about your own self-esteem, body image, and body dysmorphia, and all those fun topics that we get to enjoy sometimes as women. But even deeper than that was this idea of like, you are supposed to, and then anytime someone says supposed to or should around me, I'm like, buzzer, veto, red flag. But my idea used to be, you know, a good wife or the mark of a good marriage is that you have sex a certain amount of time for certain frequency. And my husband and I both realized that we had come into our marriage basically assuming that his sex drive was the normal, the thing that we needed to like use as our yardstick or whatever. And anything that deviated from that on my part was wrong. So he wants to have sex X times a week and I want to have sex a different frequency. And it literally was like a revelation to me when I realized, like, what if my sex drive is just as normal and healthy as his? It's just different. Like, what if I'm not a freak because I only want to have sex twice a month? What if I'm not broken?
Right.
And it completely changed the way that we approached our sex life. And I'm not going to lie, it was rocky there for a while because we went from me being like, okay, it's time for me to do my duty, even though I'm not that into it, to like, no, like I'm too old for this crap and I'm not doing that anymore. Like I don't want to. And I think it's really messed up that I should. And I don't want to give for 1 second the false impression that my husband ever like pressured me or nothing like that. It was all coming from my own self image of what my role in the world was and what was normal and what was abnormal. And it was all from my own part. And that's why it was this revolution. It was a revolution for me of like, I'm just going to realize this in a totally different way. And, I will say that it's not for the faint of heart. Anybody out there who's starting to think about doing this, like it led to like a 6-month like place between me and my husband where we definitely fought. We had to really completely change. It pushed both of us like so far outside of our comfort zones when you think of in terms of how we saw ourselves and what the world owed us or what our rights were and things like that. And, you know, it was pretty intense, but I mean, I feel like also it was necessary. It's kind of like that saying, the only way out is through. Like we had to go through that and so that we could stay together truthfully, because I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life in that vibe that I had put myself in truthfully.
But I think that that's what so many women, you know, they find themselves in that situation, but they don't have the courage or necessarily the voice to bring it up and have that difficult conversation. Because I think everybody knows like the key to any relationship is communication, right? Like that's basic relationships 101. But to actually have that conversation, to be like, no, I don't want to be this way. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And I think that's why I say like I reached this age. It's not because a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old or whatever couldn't say the same thing or have the same right to say those things, of course. But for me personally, it took this long for me to get to the place where I knew myself well enough and had kind of, I don't know, excavated my own inner garbage enough to understand the kind of messed up messages I was working on. Because I think even if I had had the feeling or the quote unquote bravery to have that conversation 10 years ago, I don't think I would have even realized that, that I was even telling myself a story about your marriage is supposed to be like this, or there's something wrong with you if you don't want to do this or whatever. I think I would have, if someone had asked me in that time, I would have said, oh no, this is just how it is. And we have to do this because it's right for our marriage and it's good to keep our marriage healthy. And I want to do that. You know, it matters to me. It's just, I think as you age, I mean, thank goodness, I don't want to be the same as I was when I was 15 or 20 or whatever. But, you know, as you age, you just keep peeling back more and more layers of yourself and realizing like, wow, I didn't even know that this is who I am, or this is a whole new side of myself, or I'm so much more comprehensive and complex and subtle than I knew. So I think it is the bravery piece for sure. Like you said, of, you know, forcing yourself or being bold enough to have that conversation, but then also even knowing yourself enough to realize that you want to have that conversation.
I wonder too, if like you working with all of these women, for the past how many years, like that has actually changed you and made you more self-aware.
Oh, you hit the nail on the head in subtle and in maybe more shallow ways too. Like one of the reasons why I was ready to have that conversation with my husband is because like I sit here in front of my computer all day, every day, and my clients tell me what's going on in their lives. And I knew after speaking to hundreds of women, I'm like, I'm not weird. Like, oh wait, like I think it totally emboldened me to realize like I'm totally normal and I'm not going to think anything different than that from now on, like enough. And I'm so grateful for that experience. I mean, obviously in way more deep and profound ways than just like, oh, now I know what 100 different women's sex lives are like. But in this specific instance, that meant a lot to me for sure. And then also on the more like maybe profound or subtle way, it's like connecting with women. It's a huge privilege for me. And, we talked about a tribe earlier, like, the modern world doesn't allow us to be hunters and gatherers or whatever anymore. But through the work that I do feel like I have a tribe. I'm connecting to women in ways that are so profound, and it is empowering for me. And also, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but, kind of just lights a fire under your butt of like, we need to do something about this. Like, this is not right,
I totally relate to that. I get that 100%. Just in the past, like 2 years of like blogging and then the podcast and everything, like I completely have found that feeling, that tribe as well, because it's like, we're all out there. We just need to connect. And then when we do, it's like incredible things happen.
Right.
They really do.
I think it's the people like you and like other people who are willing to not only put themselves out there and make themselves available and talk about parenting stuff, but also to show their like really not so pretty parts of their life, like I recently went to Bali for 3 weeks and it was like an amazing trip and everyone was like super excited and it sounds so romantic and like, all woke of me to do that. But the reason why I went there was because I was in a really dark place and I was dealing with a lot of stuff. And we wind up, whether we want to or not, being kind of people that people come to for support or advice or resources or whatever. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I definitely have. When I first started working with parents outside of birth, I felt a lot of pressure that I couldn't expose my mistakes or insecurities or anything except to a select few people, because I felt like I was going to lose the respect of all of these people that I mean, to be honest, as a business person, was hoping would want to work with me. And so you realize you can, but you have to be brave about. But at first it does feel like you can't put yourself out there. You can't share your mistakes and struggles and things like that. And so I think it's not just putting yourself out there, but putting yourself out there in an actually really authentic way instead of just showing your highlight reel, as we say.
100%. And I think that that's coming. I think that there's definitely been an awakening in the woke community, in the coaching space. Like more and more people are doing that. But obviously we still have a long way to go. And I don't know, I think it's just that internal pressure that we just put on ourselves. Like everyone wants to be, perfect and wants to at least show their best face, especially to people that they don't necessarily know. But I mean, by you doing that, by you saying that right now, like that's changing, that's changing the global consciousness right there.
Like this is something that's come up in a coaching group that I'm leading right now, where, especially when you're talking about social media, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be something like a comment your mother-in-law makes or some lady at the playground or something. But, those things, depending on what your mindset is and what you're bringing to the table, can be super triggers. How do you parse out the stuff that's actually important for you to deal with, but it's private? It's your own business. It's your own mind drama. It's your own story that you need to get healing around and process and explore and stuff like that. But you don't need to do that with that other person, whether it's have a big old fight with your mother-in-law or go back and argue with somebody on Facebook or whatever. And how much of it is something that you need to do publicly or within an interaction with another person, of setting boundaries, responding to somebody in a way that kind of put things right. And it's very, very hard to parse those things out. And it's also hard to kind of pump the brakes and be like, I'm not going to respond at all right now. My policy with my clients is like, give yourself 24 hours to just feel all the feels. And then you'll be so much better capable 24 hours from now of understanding like how much of this is stuff that is for the public eye and how much of this is stuff that's like very important, but it's my own problem and it's my own business and it doesn't belong out there. So especially for people like you and me who are out there anyways, I think there's like a third layer there, which is like, how much of this am I keeping to myself because I'm embarrassed versus how much of this am I keeping to myself because it's really nobody's business. And so, you know, the group coaching program that I'm leading right now is a bunch of mompreneurs. So we're also doing business work as well as the parenting stuff. And so, you know, talking with these moms about like, you know, how much do you really want to engage with someone who's giving you a negative review, for example? But it's all so interconnected. It's all really about your own, once again, maternal mindset, that mindset piece that's triggering you or creating this reaction in you or making you feel obligated to do something that's really not aligned at all for you and things like that. So
I love it.
It's interesting
Like,
all that stuff is so interconnected.
It is. And from what I'm getting, like from the core of your work really is about shifting people's stories and mindsets about themselves and about their lives. And it's like when you do that, like you really do become a different person and you have a different life.
Right, totally. And I mean, when I'm actually working with clients one-on-one, there's a huge part of what we do that's about discipline. And like I said, getting kids to listen and, you know, handling tantrums and stuff like that. You know, today I know that we want to talk about maternal mindset and it's a huge piece for sure. And I think the take-home message that I hope all of your listeners will take from this is that all three of those elements, that systems, the mindset, and the behavior, and that discipline piece are so crucial that you can't have any of them be successful if you don't have the other two. And you're so right. You know, if you really if you really have your mindset in a negative headspace or a place where you're just completely, you know, basically hanging by a thread or in survival mode, those other two pieces they're never going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. And that was my last question. Like, what's your biggest takeaway? So I love that you ended with that. We're so in sync. But, you know, as you were talking, like my sister came to mind and she is someone who, you know, it works really hard, way more than full-time. And then she's got a child at home and she feels a lot of the time just completely on edge, like burned out, kind of that negative mindset. And she's like the most loving person you'll ever meet. So, I mean, how would you approach someone like that? You know, and that's a lot of my listeners too. Like they're hard workers. They've got multiple kids. To end out the interview, what would you say to her? How can she improve her week, her day, her life starting today?
The first thing whenever I am talking to a mom who's also working outside of the home, whether part-time or even full-time, you know, I always ask everybody, do you have any childcare? Do you have any times when you're not with your kids? And working moms almost always say, oh yeah, I'm away from my kids all the time because I go to work. And I'm like, okay, but that doesn't count. Right. So my second question always with working moms is like, when are you away from your kids and not working? And almost always the answer is never, because they feel guilty because they're already away from their kids plenty of time because they're working. And so they don't really do anything to take care of themselves many, many times. And I just want to say obviously there's like a 6 months worth of work I could do with your sister. But the one thing I would say to her is work is not self-care. And you need self-care. Every human being needs self-care. So just because you have a job doesn't mean that you get to skip that. That's like saying, well, I ate breakfast, so I never have to eat again. Or actually it's more like saying, well, I slept. So, and that's one basic human need. So I guess I don't need food because I already have one of my needs. It's not possible. You need self-care. So work doesn't count as self-care. It's something else that you're doing that's amazing, but it's not self-care. That's kind of like tiny little nutshell for her.
I love that. And for everyone listening, I hope you really embody that this week. Okay, well, now is the time for our rapid fire question section. Are you ready?
Yay. Yes, I heard this on one of your other podcasts. Oh God, what is she going to ask me? Can I answer fast enough?
I know, I change it up. They're not always the same. So, okay, good.
Okay.
Okay. Motherhood is?
Motherhood is creating a safe space for our kids to make mistakes and experience what happens when they do that.
Self-care is
filling yourself up. It can look like anything.
The world needs
self-love and acceptance.
I love that. And what's something that you've learned in life that you wish someone would have told you earlier on?
Oh, something someone would have told me earlier on about motherhood. I would say that no matter how much you want to be a mom, you'll probably regret it for at least 1 minute a day for the rest of your life.
God, you're so real. I love it. You're like speaking to my soul, this whole conversation.
That's so great. I love that.
Love it. Okay, so how can our listeners find you, work with you, and then tell us about the freebie that you're going to offer everyone listening right now?
So my business is called Mom Me Experience, but it's Mom Me, like M-E, because it is all about the me and the mom. And you can find me online at my website, mommeexperience.com. I also have a Facebook group by the same name. And if you're interested in finding that blog that I was talking about, that sexual revolution, I'll send you a link for that, Lizzie. You can put it in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And the freebie that I have for everyone, and I hope everybody takes me up on it because this freebie is really good. It's a free guide to getting your kids to listen the first time you talk. And that is super easy to find. It's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/mama guide. And I was just actually going over that guide just recently with a coach of mine, and she's like, this guide is really good. I'm like, I know, I'm really proud of it. It really walks you through step by step exactly how to implement natural consequences without losing your cool and yelling and all that stuff. You could probably make a huge change in your family just with that guide. And that was why I wrote it. So
I love it. Definitely send that today because I need to read it and get this out to the world. Yeah. Lizzie needs it first.
Me first. I hope you do use it, and then you can tell everyone how great it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this was such a pleasure. I feel like, God, I got so much out of this conversation. So that tells me that the audience is absolutely in that same place. So thank you so much, Anne. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your life.
Thank you. Yes, of course.
You have been listening to the Motherhood Unstressed podcast, and I'm your host, Liz Carlisle. If you found any kind of value out of this conversation today, please share us on your Instagram stories, tag us at Motherhood Unstressed, and hit those 5 stars. It literally takes 5 seconds to do that, and you will feel so good for giving back to the show if we have given anything to you. Have a great week. Love you guys.